Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, really looking forward to talking to you all tonight. Um, it's great weather here. I'm sorry to say so. The bugs are bad, so if that's any consolation for anyone. But yes, thank you for the intro. So my name is Sophia. I work at Bimini Biological Field Station Foundation, which is a mouthful. So we mostly just call it the Bimini Shark Lab. That's how people mostly know us around here and then also around the world and in the shark science kind of sphere. All right, so a little bit about me. So I'm originally from Maine. I grew up there. I spent, first 18 years of my life there. I loved it, except I didn't like the winters. So when it came time to choose a college, I ended up going to Davidson College down in North Carolina. And I really liked that. I studied environmental studies with an emphasis in marine biology. And then after I graduated, I was lucky enough to become an intern down here at the Bimini Shark Lab. So I spent 6 months here and I learned the ins and outs, got to do a lot of the science, tagging, learn all about sharks, which, I liked before, but I really didn't know how much I truly loved them until this internship. And when it came time for me to leave, I decided I wanted to continue with studies. So I actually went down to Australia, where I did my master's at James Cook University. And I was specializing in marine biology. And I ended up doing my thesis on some tiger shark age and growth, which is a really cool area that I didn't know much about before I started it. Ended up being one of my passions. And then recently, after graduating at the end of 2019, beginning of 2020, I came back here as a staff this time to the Bimini Shark Lab, this time as the outreach coordinator. So I'm in charge of a lot of the science communication. I do talks like this with you people, talks to classrooms across the globe, really. And then hopefully, when it's not too bad with COVID, we get to do some in-person classroom visits as well. But most of the time, what we're doing here is a lot of shark science. So for anyone who isn't familiar with the area, this is the Bahamas. Oops, sorry, my slide is skipping ahead. This is the Bahamas, all of this beautiful area, lots of islands. And then Bimini is located actually just off the coast here. And it is the closest island to Florida. And we have got sharks pretty much everywhere around. Bimini is actually made up of 2 islands. I'm so sorry, I don't know why my slides are doing this. It's made up of 2 islands. The Shark Lab is right located on the bottom, and we do a bunch of shark tagging around here. So we tag everything from the biggest sharks that come into our waters down even to the prey that they eat, which are also stingrays, which are a type of shark, but we'll get into that in a minute. So I always ask this question because, depending on who I'm talking to, it's a very different answer. So when I ask a second grade classroom in the Midwest, what is a shark? I get a lot of really fun answers that I love. And then when I ask, more adults, I tend to be in college age, the answer changes a little bit. So I always like to start here. And it really comes down to anatomy. So what exactly is a shark? Sharks are part of the Chondrichthyes, so that's the class that they're in, and that includes chimeras, elasmobranchs, which are sharks and rays, and skates. So these are all of the different types of sharks that we would call Chondrichthyes. Chimeras have their own special category because they are a very different type of shark. I encourage people to look into them. They're absolutely wild. They're very, very cool animals. So the elasmobranchs, though, are the subclass of the Chondrichthyes, and this is just the sharks, rays, and skates. And around in Bimini, we just have sharks and rays here. We don't, unfortunately, have any skates. Skates, you would see things like guitar fish. That would be one of the skates, or the little skate is another type. But here we just get sharks and rays, and there's plenty to do with all of them. So when I say what's a shark, most people think of the great white shark. And I was told that you guys had a talk from the Atlantic White Shark Conservancy a few weeks ago. They do some really cool stuff with white sharks. And when you look at a white shark, that's the first thing that comes to mind. probably Jaws also comes to mind. Great movie, by the way. It's actually, if you ask any shark scientist, it's probably their favorite movie, unironically. But you look at this animal and it's got this torpedo body. It's got these big eyes, it's got big teeth, a big mouth, it's got a powerful tail, and of course it's got that dorsal fin. But in actuality, most sharks look like this. They're usually less than a meter long. They have this fan tail type of tail on their back, and then they have really kind of small fins all around, and they're generally not very big. So even though we think most sharks are apex predators, most of them aren't. Just the really big ones end up being apex, and the rest of them end up being prey, unfortunately. So what distinguishes a shark from a fish, right? So we know that, of course, fish and sharks both breathe water, they have gills, but specifically sharks are cartilaginous. So they don't have that same bony structure that fish do. Their bones consist of vertebrae and jaws and a couple little bones here and there, but generally their entire body is cartilaginous. And there are over 500 species of shark in the sea. They can look wildly different wherever you are. If you're at the shallow water in the Pacific, or if you are at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, you're going to find a really wide range in sharks and what they look like. Generally, they have anywhere between 5 and 7 gill slits. Typically, the shallow water sharks tend to have 5 gill slits. But then as you get deeper, less oxygen in the water, you see more gill slits as well. So we get a few of those deep water species around here, like the big eye 6 gill or the sharp nose 7 gill. I love those guys because they are named exactly like they sound. So it's very easy to identify them. They've got big eyes and 6 gills. So well naming them. So they also have 7 senses, which is pretty amazing. So they have all the senses that we have, and they have 2 extra, which I'll talk about more in a minute. And they have dermal denticles on their skin, which is pretty amazing. It's a type of armor essentially around them. And I'll get more into that as well. And then they also have 3 forms of reproduction. So some people might have heard that sharks lay eggs. Some people might hear that sharks give birth like humans, and both are correct, and there's some room in between as well. So I'll talk about that more as we go on. So in terms of their senses, they have got all of the ones that we have: sight, taste, hearing, touch, and smell. And they use all of these pretty much to find their prey. Touch is the one that's a little bit different, kind of melds into taste a little bit, because of course when you don't have hands, you can only touch so much with your face before you need to use your mouth to touch things. And that is where we get a little bit more into accidental bites and mistaken identities, because of course if you don't have hands, you wouldn't be able to know what you're about to eat. But on top of that, they also have electroreception, and these are called the ampullae of Lorenzini. So all along this shark's nose, this is a tiger shark, you can see these small dots here. These are actually pores, and they're filled with a jelly-like substance, similar to what people use for ultrasounds. And these are the ampullae of Lorenzini. And this is what sharks use in order to detect electroreception in the water. So when a fish is flailing around, they can feel the electromagnetic impulses from the fish as it's flailing, and they can detect that in the water. It's especially potent when there's fresh blood. And that's when, of course, if you cut yourself and there's blood going out, there is an open current essentially, because there's of course electricity in your blood. So when there's an open current going out into the water, that's when they can sense really well using their electroreception. And then they also have this 7th sense, which is a little bit different. And it's hard for us to imagine, but it is actually called a lateral line, and it measures pressure in the water. So this is a line that goes along the side of the shark, along the side of its body. And it has similarly spots with these pores. You can see it very well in this picture, a few different lines of pores along here. But in most sharks, it's really hard to see, and you wouldn't be able to really get a good look of their lateral line unless you're got your head pressed against them, which usually they don't still stay still long enough in order for you to do that. But this sense is essentially sharks being able to detect where things are in the water column based on the pressure that other objects are giving off. So it'd be like if you could close your eyes and someone came next to you, you'd be able to feel the less air movement in between you and be able to sense them there based on the pressure in between you, rather than seeing them or hearing them. And this is probably the least understood of all of the shark senses, is the lateral line. Scientists are still figuring out exactly what they use this sense for, how they use it, and exactly when it comes in handy. So there's still a lot of interesting research being done on that, but it's something that we're still, we're struggling to understand. But it is very cool area of research. So back to these dermal denticles, the shark skin is of course made of these. And I don't know if anyone is a Latin buff, or maybe you've heard this term before, but of course this is teeth skin, is essentially what dermal denticles are. And that's because a shark skin is made up of modified teeth. This is what a nurse sharks look like. This is incredibly thick skin. It is very, very hard to penetrate. And it looks a bit different on a nurse shark than it does on, say, a dogfish, because they have very different life history traits. So a nurse shark likes to hang out underneath ledges. It doesn't swim around a lot. And it likes to hang out on the bottom of the seafloor. And when it's underneath those ledges, there's a lot of sharp rocks that are poking into it. So they need some very thick skin so they don't get punctured. Dogfish, on the other hand, swim around quite a bit, and makos as well. So their dermal denticles look a bit more like this. They look a bit like scales, and they have these ridges in them that actually help with hydrodynamics when they swim through the water. So they can swim through the water quicker and more effectively without as much drag. So when you look at dermal denticles, it really depends on what species you're looking at, because they're going to be a bit different. For us personally, the nurse shark is the bane of our tagging existence. We have broken a few scalpels, more than a few scalpels, on the nurse shark skin because it is so incredibly thick. But obviously that serves them incredibly well for their life cycle and lifestyle. So good for them, tough for our scalpels, but we'll get through somehow. So in terms of reproduction, they actually have 3 categories of reproduction. And I say that because occasionally there are some exceptions. But in general, we have vivipary, which is live birth. We have ovipary, which is birth from an egg. And then we have something called aplacental vivipary. It used to be called ovovivipary. And that is when there is an egg inside of the shark. And that's similar to this yolk sac you see here. So a lot of times, even though sharks will be inside of the babies will be inside of the mother, they may not be connected via placenta. Some have yolk sacs instead. So one example of a shark that gives birth by laying eggs are Port Jackson sharks. They have really interestingly shaped eggs. They actually look like corkscrews. And when they initially lay the eggs, they go and they pick them up in their mouths, carry them around until they find a suitable place where they literally screw these eggs into these rocky areas so that they're protected from predators. And that helps them because there are a few different animals out there that definitely go after some shark eggs. Easy targets, lots of nutrition in there. Yolk sacs are a bit different. So we have a few different species that give birth via yolk sac. One of them is the tiger shark. This is one of those kind of asterisk exceptions to the subcategories. Tiger sharks are actually in their own type of category because of their reproductive style. Even though they do have placentals, or they don't have placentals, they have the yolk sac for all their pups. Most sharks, if you have the head up here and the tail down here, and the mama shark, the babies are lined up vertically in the stomach. Tiger sharks, on the other hand, are lined up horizontally, so they can fit a lot of them in there. And when you do see a pregnant female tiger shark, it's not that surprising to realize that, because they are wide. They are very, very thick. And this is essentially just the same thing as if it was placental, except all of the pups have a yolk sac attached. When they're born, the yolk sac breaks and they can swim freely into the water. And then some sharks do actually have a live birth. So that's with a placental connection. And yes, sharks do have belly buttons. That's what this little circle is here, and this little mark. We actually use this as one of the ways where we can find out exactly how long ago the pups have been born. So with our lemon sharks here, we have a lot of juvenile lemons in the area. They tend to stay here for the first 6 or 7 years of their lives in the mangroves. And so we get to know them pretty well over that period of time. And typically the lemon sharks are born right around April, May of each year. And when they're first born, for the first few weeks, they still have an open umbilical cord, like you can see here, an open belly button. And that's what we use when we catch them, so that we can measure them to determine how long ago they were born. And this is actually a video that was captured at the Shark Lab of a live shark birth of a lemon shark. I can get us to play here. Oh, here we go.
The lemon shark's purpose in life isn't to terrorize tourists, it's to make more lemon sharks. And to do that, females come to the Bimini Lagoon every April. Most animals...
I'm sorry, my Wi-Fi is not the best here.
Either lay eggs or give live birth. Sharks do both. This lemon shark has been carrying her young for about 9 months. Like baby mammals, they've been fed by a placenta, and each is joined to its mother by an umbilical cord. The number of babies in a litter varies between 4 and 17. Delivering her babies in this shallow, safe lagoon is the closest the mother gets to actually caring for them. She doesn't give them a glance after they're born and surely wouldn't recognize them if she did. In fact, she'd probably try to eat them, although it's thought a shark giving birth is under the influence of a natural appetite suppressant, at least for a while. As soon as they're born, the baby lemons need refuge and head for the shallows and the shelter provided by nearby mangrove roots.
Right, so that was actually filmed here in Bimini. It's one of the few places, if you were to look up lemon shark birth, you would come across any video filmed here. So we're lucky enough that we can actually see that in person occasionally. So the lemon shark is just one of the species that we do study here in Bimini. These are some of the others that we do some tagging with, including the great hammerheads. Bimini is actually one of the only places in the world where you can reliably see great hammerheads. That's because they come down here on their winter migration. So right around now that the water is cooling down, is when they start coming back down from up north around Virginia area, and they come and hang out in the warmer waters around Bimini. We do feed them around here, so we think that's probably part of the reason why they're hanging out. They get a nice meal, especially from the dive operators that run out of Bimini. The tiger sharks also frequent the waters in Bimini pretty often. we have a very high number of tiger sharks that come into the area. But in terms of coming back and sticking around, we don't necessarily see the same individuals all the time. So we actually have a pretty low recapture rate for these guys. And a lot of times if you see a tiger shark in Bimini, that'll probably be the only time you see that individual. But we do get a lot of them in here, especially pregnant females and juveniles as well. So that's leading us to believe that the females are using this area for some reason. Maybe it's provisioning, maybe it's a good pupping ground for them. But we can see that those two life cycle stages right there, the pregnancy and the birth. Caribbean reef sharks, we also get quite a few of those around here. They like to hang off the rocky areas around Bimini. So we have some sand flats, some mangroves, some seagrass. These guys hang out in the reef areas. They were actually just listed as endangered by the IUCN earlier this year. They were vulnerable and now they've been downgraded, as it were. So their importance in conservation has increased along with our importance for studying them. Black tip sharks also frequent Bimini. These guys are frequent visitors to Florida as well. Some of you may have heard of the black tip migrations. So the ones that we have here, we're not sure exactly how far away they travel, but they definitely don't get quite as big as the ones in Florida. So generally, the sharks to Bimini and around the Atlantic aren't quite as big as the ones you get in the Pacific. But these black tip sharks are incredibly energetic. They're very cool species to see in the water, and they're just really amazing whenever we get the opportunity to see them. They tend to be very finicky on the line, so they're sensitive when they're caught. So we tend to release them as quickly as possible, which is why we still have a lot of questions about where they're going, how they're spending their time, because of course, our top priority is the safety of the animal and the health. So we would never want to endanger the life of one of the animals while we're working them up or tagging them. The Atlantic nurse shark, we have these everywhere. You can't move for nurse sharks down here, and they're a very cool species. So they look completely different than pretty much any of the other species we see around here. They're the only species of shark in the Atlantic that has barbels. They kind of look like catfish. Occasionally they're called catfish around here, but these guys are pretty much like puppy dogs. So they'll come and lay at your feet, and they're pretty impressive. Oh, there we go. Bull sharks are one of our other seasonal visitors. So bull sharks tend to come down around this time of year as well with the great hammerheads. We get a lot of pregnant female bull sharks around here. We know, of course, that bull sharks give birth to their pups in the freshwater. In estuaries, they go into the rivers, and that's where they give birth to their pups. Bimini doesn't have any freshwater or estuaries around it, so it is very interesting that we do see a lot of pregnant females around here. So there must be some reason why they're using this site, why they're coming to Bimini, especially at that term in their pregnancy. So that's one of our current ongoing research studies. One of the things we want to look at next with the bull sharks is their reproductive habits here. And then we also get species like the black-nosed shark and the sharp-nosed shark. We aren't currently doing any major research with them, but of course we are tracking their movements. We do tag them whenever we catch them. And if we ever do decide to do research with them, we have about 30 years of data where we can look back and determine what we have for data with these guys. The great hammerhead is the top predator in Bimini. So we have a lot of top predators here, and this is probably the most famous and one of the most beautiful, if I may be biased, and put my scientific hat off for a second. But in terms of actual evolution, the hammerhead is incredible. And they've got some really amazing ways that they use their weirdly shaped heads and bodies in their advantage. So one of the things that you can tell about the individuals is that they have different splotches on them. And this is one of the ways we use to identify the hammerhead. So we actually name our hammerheads. They are so reliable each year that we have our hammerhead friends. We have Medusa, we have Amphitrite, we have Tethos, we have Chaos, and of course they're all named after the Greek gods and goddesses. So that's pretty special around here. We love seeing them. Hopefully we'll see them again soon now that the water's cooling down. We just had a question in the chat. What is your view of tourist shark dive facilities? And I think great question. I'll come back to that one at the end because it can be a little bit of a debate, but absolutely great question. Remind me of that in case I forget it. So this is one of the species that a lot of tourist companies dive with. We do dives with them as well, mostly for scientific reasons. And when we do identify them, we try to use their markings as a way to identify the individual. So if you get a good view of their ventral side, you can see these individual patterns will let us know exactly which individual we're looking at. They also have these amazing cephalofoils. So that's the top of their head here. And that is how they're able to actually find prey. So their typical size around the world is about 6 meters, but in Bimini, we're only going to get to about 4 meters long, which is still a pretty massive shark. That's still over 16 feet. So it's a very large shark. And especially when you're in the water with them. But generally in the Pacific, you get the same species, the same great hammerhead species, but they generally tend to grow a little bit larger there. And that's across most species, so including tiger sharks, any of the sharks in the Pacific, great whites as well. So the way that they use their cephalofoil is really interesting. So they have the hydrodynamic ability when they're swimming through the water. And if you ever see a hammerhead that's swimming through the water, they actually come and they glide on a little bit of an angle, kind of like this angle. And that's because it's more hydrodynamic for them with how tall their dorsal fin is to glide on a side, kind of like a plane does. So that allows them to get the most movement out of least energy, which is pretty much always what a shark is thinking of when they're not thinking about food. They're thinking about how they can swim more easily. And the cephalofoil, even though it seems like they can't see anything in front of them, they actually have 270-degree field of visibility. Yes, there is a little bit of a blind spot straight in front of them, but generally they have incredible visibility and ability to see all around them. And in that sense, it is very helpful. They also are ram ventilators. So that's, if you guys have heard possibly that sharks need to keep swimming in order to breathe, that's one of these sharks. That's not true for all different shark species, but for the great hammerhead, that is true. And this helps with their ventilation. So they keep their mouth open, and the shape of their mouth as they're swimming through the water helps them actually pass water across their gills more easily, which is why you may occasionally see sharks opening and closing their mouth while they're swimming. And that is because they're trying to find a good angle to pass water across their gills. And of course, their mouth located at the bottom of their body means they have really good access to prey, because their prey is mostly stingrays and eagle rays. And what they do when they catch their prey is they actually pin it down with the cephalofoil. And as they've got it pinned down, because their mouth is right there, they're able to just take a bite. It's pretty amazing. So that's how they use their cephalofoil when they're hunting. And of course, across all of their cephalofoils, they have the ampullae of Lorenzini, which are those electroreceptive sensory organs. And these act like a metal detector. If you think about it, when the hammerheads swim, they kind of move their head back and forth across the sand, and that's them also looking for prey. So they can dig up some fish or some rays that are buried in the sand, especially the rays that are pretty good at hiding in the sand by throwing the sand on top of them. These ampullae of Lorenzini will help identify that stingray even when it's buried under the sand, and help them find their prey. So it's pretty amazing how they've evolved to do that. So these are the prey species that a great hammerhead would go after. We have the white-spotted eagle ray over on the left. They're a very fast-moving species. They like to glide through the air, and they're more in the water column. They don't tend to hang out on the bottom. And then, of course, we have the stingray, which we see everywhere around here. Very, very common prey item for great hammerheads and bull sharks as well. And yes, they do have venomous spines in them, right at the base of their tail. And no, the great hammerheads don't care, and neither do the bull sharks. So occasionally we'll see them and they just have those barbs sticking out of their mouth, and it really doesn't seem to deter them at all from going after these individuals. So we don't know if they have an immunity to the toxin, or the food tastes better than the toxin, or exactly how they're dealing with it, but they do have that immunity. Tiger shark is one of our other top predators here. It's my personal favorite, mostly because I did my master's thesis with them, but they are pretty amazing around here. So these are one of the top predators. I like to say that they're my favorite because if you look at them, they're absolutely built for speed. They have strong bodies, they've got strong tails, big mouths, and they are one of the laziest sharks in the water. They are slow swimmers, they don't go very quickly, and they tend to pick off a lot of the dead stuff in the water. So here we are working up one of the pregnant females, and this is one of the bigger sharks that we've had in the water. So typically they can get up to 5 to 7 meters. 7 meters is kind of one of those fisherman accounts. So we haven't recorded it scientifically that they get up to be that large, but it has been seen in theory. But around Bimini, around 4 meters, just like the great hammerheads, is going to be pretty much the largest tiger shark that you're going to see around here. But that doesn't mean that they are not very big, especially when they're pregnant. They get very, very, very thick pregnant bellies, and they sit low in the water. As juveniles, they have these really amazing patterns. That's where the name tiger shark comes from. As they get older, their stripes and spots tend to fade, which is why we don't always use patterns and coloration to identify the sharks. We use other features. So for example, they have these very square faces and these very big eyes, and this strong interdorsal ridge, which is kind of this line you can see going alongside the shark. So that's one of the ways we can identify them. But when they're babies and when they're this big, it's really easy to see. They have really gorgeous spots all over them. They're very eel-like as well when they're first born, because if you can imagine, when you're stuffed into a mother shark with 40 other babies, it can get pretty cramped, and you have to be able to be very flexible. So as they get older, their bodies stiffen up quite a bit and they're a bit stronger swimmers. But when they're first born, very slow, very ineffective way of swimming, kind of like eels moving through the water. And they do have counter shading as well. So it's thought that their stripes and spots from above look like ripples in the water. And then of course from below, they have that white coloration on the bottom. And that's the idea that if you were to be looking up at a shark in the water, you would see the white belly, and then the white light from the sun would blend in. So that's the idea behind counter shading. So back to these square heads, they have incredibly distinguishable square heads. It's one of the first things I see about a tiger shark whenever I look at them. And that's because they have this really interesting jaw. They have these jaws that have this sort of hinge in the middle. So they're able to actually move the different sections of their jaw independently from the other. And that is how they're able to get around one of their favorite prey items, which is sea turtles. And then, of course, their jaw is lined with these amazing double serrated teeth. So just like a serrated knife, they have these teeth that have serrations on both sides out here, and then also on the inside as well. And these are used when they're going after these turtles. It is unfortunate. I do love sea turtles. They are amazing. But I thought that this is a pretty cool evolutionary adaptation. When tiger sharks are able to bite down on a turtle shell, they have those specially shaped jaws so they can get their mouth around the shell. And then once they have their teeth in, they use this double serration on their teeth as a saw to go back and forth. And they actually saw through the shell with their jaws, which is pretty incredible. Not a lot of the other sharks rely on that. A lot of them rely on the force of their bite or the size of their teeth. But it is pretty cool that tiger sharks have that ability, that they use it a little bit different than the other sharks. But for the most part, turtles are a lot of work. And wherever possible, you will see tiger sharks going after anything in the water. This was a video that we captured earlier this year. So we had a little bit of bait in this tube that we usually put in when we're trying to attract the sharks. The sharks cannot get to the bait when it's in this tube. And as you can see, this tiger shark was a little bit fed up with that. So here she is swimming on with it in her mouth, which is very unfortunate for us because we reuse those bait tubes. And when you look at her, pretty big shark, if you don't know the size of the bait tube, pretty much from here to here is 70 centimeters. So that's, a couple feet long. And if you look at that, it just looks like a bone in her mouth. So based on that, we were able to do some size estimations, and because we didn't capture her on a hook, so we were able to estimate that she was probably around 3.5 meters, which is a very big shark. Thankfully, she realized she probably wasn't going to be able to get to any of the fish, and about maybe 10 meters away from the boat, she dropped it and swam away, and we were able to go in the water and retrieve that bait tube. But that was pretty funny. She actually ripped it off of a line that we had on the boat. So like I said, they're just garbage cans. They'll go after anything that's an easy meal, even though they have all of these amazing evolutionary adaptations to go after some pretty fast prey items. The lemon shark I mentioned before is actually not a top predator. They would be nice if they were, but this is kind of one of those examples that not all sharks are going to be apex predators. And one of the things that that video that I showed mentioned is that while the mother was giving birth, they actually had an appetite suppressant so that she wouldn't eat her own young. And that is absolutely true. So a lot of lemon sharks get eaten by other lemon sharks, as well as bull sharks, black tip sharks, tiger sharks. Pretty much anything that's bigger than them when they're babies is going to eat them. And that's true for pretty much any baby shark or smaller shark. And then even the lemon sharks, when they get bigger, and they're about 2 meters long, they can still be taken out by, a 4-meter tiger shark if it has the energy to chase after them. So these little guys are mostly the ones that we do a lot of our science with. Like I said, they tend to hang out in the mangroves for the first 7 years of their lives. And it's a huge reason why we're actually based in Bimini. So they do have juvenile lemon sharks in Florida. They are there. But in Bimini, there are plenty of them here. And we have one of the most pristine mangrove habitats in the Bahamas. And that's where they have their nurseries. So that's where they spend their lives, because in those mangrove roots that are very tall prop roots, that's where they can hide away from predators. So they have a very different approach to life. Tiger sharks, when they're babies, their first goal is to grow as fast as possible so that they are not exposed to predators. And the bigger they are, the less likely they are to be eaten by something. Lemon sharks have nurseries, so they don't have to worry quite as much about being eaten by things, and they grow a little bit slower. So they can hide out in those mangroves when they're babies, and then they have a lot of time to be able to perfect their life skills. They get to be very selective with their diets. They're very good hunters, and they really learn how to be prop sharks. And they only grow about maybe 10 centimeters a year. So pretty small growth rate with these guys, but we do see that they have a very high survival rate, especially compared to other sharks that don't have nurseries like tiger sharks. And they also hang out in groups together. So this is a bit of a fake out, but this is actually one of the pens that we used in the past. This is how we kind of keep them when we're doing our annual pit survey, which is capturing as many of the juvenile lemons as we can that are born every year. And so to avoid recapturing them, we keep them in these kind of semi-captive pens in the water until our survey is over, and then we release them. It's much less stressful for them to be in these pens than to be captured every single night, because they would be. And we estimate that we do get about 95% of all the lemon sharks that are born each year in the mangroves, which is a pretty impressive survey. There's not a lot of other data sets in the world that have that kind of results, especially going back 30 years. But back to the point of this video is all of those little lemon sharks swimming together. So they are incredibly social and they spend time in groups together. And there's actually studies that we've done here that show that lemon sharks learn from each other and they improve when they're with groups. So they're able to learn hunting skills from each other. They're able to avoid predators from each other. And that type of skill, we think, really helps them as they're growing up in the mangroves. This is an example of one of the unfortunate incidences that happened with some of the larger sharks. So while this shark was being tracked all around Bimini, these are the red dots here were the during high tide. And then of course, these are during low tide when they're able to move farther away from the mangroves. And this was unfortunately a shark that was being tracked. It got attacked by, they think it was a bull shark that was able to come into the deeper water. But these guys really do face a lot of predation, even when they have that sanctuary in the mangroves. And only occasionally does it help when there's less water. So I'm not sure how many of you've seen mangroves, but they're pretty amazing plants. And this is one of the secret passages, and I'm not even joking when I say that, there's not a hint of irony, that the juvenile lemons use. So we have this amazing system of mangroves in Bimini, and there's a few different spots like this. This is one of the ones we know to be used a lot by the juvenile lemons, is called Aya's spot. It was named after our founder, Dr. Samuel Gruber's daughter, Aya. And she was the one who found this years ago. And it looks like nothing. It looks like you're just looking at this line of mangroves when you see it. But then you see all these baby sharks coming out. And you walk through this mangrove corridor. And it really is like a passage. You can snorkel through it. They have these amazing mangrove prop roots. It's very narrow, so you can probably only fit your shoulders. Then it opens up into this amazing little lagoon in here. So it's still pretty shallow water, but it has this huge wide area filled with fish. And during the different tides, this is when the lemon sharks will come in here. So during high tide, when there's more water in the lagoon and larger predators can come in and try to predate on these juvenile lemons, that's when they come into this corridor where the bigger sharks cannot get through, and they spend their time in here in a safe little haven until the tide drops and they're safe to go back out. And I love this video because you can see them really going in and out of the mangrove roots because that's what they do when there are predators around. So it really is amazing to see them using this habitat, especially when we're around, when they're around other animals that they aren't really sure about. So in terms of how sharks are important in the ocean, I'm sure a lot of you have heard that, maybe from people like me who say sharks are important, we can't get rid of them. But exactly why are they important? It's pretty simple, and it makes a lot of sense. But essentially, they are part of a healthy ocean, just like any other part of this triangle. So at the bottom, we have our primary producers. These are plants, algae, and corals. We have the things that eat the primary producers. So we have herbivores, that's where we have our sea turtles. We have our reef fish that eat algae off of different corals and rocks. We have our predators, the next level up. So these are animals that eat herbivores. So stingrays eat herbivores. That might be a conch or a crab. We've got moray eel, and those go after fish. Other fish are in this category as well, and even some sharks. And then, of course, we have the apex predator, which is the top of the food chain. And of course, the food chain can depend. So you may be in an area that doesn't have sharks. That doesn't mean there's not a top predator. But in our case here in Bimini, we do have top predators, and those are the sharks. And they're incredibly important. And without them, we wouldn't have this nice triangle here. So if we didn't have apex predators, we would have too many predators that would overeat the herbivores, and then there would be less herbivores, and then the plants and algae would get out of control, and then the corals would die because they couldn't get to the sunlight because the algae was blocking it out, and that's a collapse of an ecosystem. So every single animal on this triangle is important to keeping an ocean healthy. And apex predators are often called the keystone predators because they help keep this together. So they also contribute to coral reef health and an ecosystem health by eating the sick and dying fish. So this is one of the ways that they avoid spreading disease among fish populations. They keep this healthy. And then we can also use the presence of sharks to indicate whether or not we have a healthy ecosystem. So if you go to a reef and there are a ton of sharks, that doesn't mean that they are overeating the other predators or smaller fish. It means that there are enough of those smaller prey items that can support that many sharks. That means it's a really abundant, healthy ecosystem. So that's how we can use sharks to kind of get a gauge on whether or not we're looking at a healthy coral reef or maybe something that's in decline. But of course, sharks have their own challenges right now. And as many times as it makes the news when someone has a shark encounter that goes in an unfortunate way, if someone receives a shark bite or unfortunately may pass away from a shark, that gets reported on a lot more than, of course, the number of shark deaths that happen. And this is due to a lot of issues. But generally, overall, sharks are declining. Populations of oceanic sharks have declined by 71%, which is a huge amount. This is a graph that recently came out that shows the overall populations. These are just oceanic sharks. This isn't even looking at the coastal sharks. A lot of the sharks I talked about today are all coastal, and they're exposed even more so to fishing pressures. So it's very difficult when looking at these individuals to say that, you know, they're an issue, especially when we know how important they are to the environment. So they have a few different problems. They have overfishing. They have shark finning, which is similar. Overfishing and shark finning are a little bit related. Overfishing occurs mostly in some areas as a result of shark finning, but also occasionally for meat as well. Shark gets sold a lot. Some of you have probably eaten shark and not realizing it. It goes by different names. And then they also get caught quite a bit by bycatch. So that's a lot of times when, you know, fishers are using long lines or they're using trolling nets and sharks get caught in them and they're unable to recover after being caught, or the fishers kill them because they're being targeted. And a lot of times, unfortunately, even if a shark is released and it seems healthy, some sharks are very, very sensitive to that. And there's a pretty high chance that a shark will die, especially the great hammerheads, and pretty much any hammerhead species are very, very sensitive. And any time on the line or being caught in a net is going to be very detrimental to their health. And most likely results in their death, even if it's an attempted, catch and release. So that's something to consider if anyone is interested in going shark fishing. Catch and release does not always necessarily mean zero mortality, especially when it comes to sharks. And of course, they're facing climate change as an issue as well, as is everything else in the water. The Bahamas solution to these, or some of the ones that we've seen around here, we have the Bahamas Shark Sanctuary. So this is actually one of the first areas in the world that is the first country in the world, that declared their entire exclusive economic zone to be a shark sanctuary, which means it is illegal to kill or sell any shark in the Bahamas. It's absolutely amazing. They mostly did it because the Bahamas has a very high shark dive tourism industry. So it is centered around that aspect, but it's really great. It was established in, I think, 11 or 14. But something that was even more influential was when the Bahamas banned commercial longlining before that. And even though that was not advertently to keep shark populations high, it was originally so that people wouldn't come in here and just commercially fish and then leave. It's much more beneficial if this is, a vacation area for people to come do sport fishing rather than commercial fishing. But the less catch that they had with those sharks absolutely helped their populations go back up. And we're seeing the shark sanctuaries really helping for the individuals that tend to stay in that area. For overfishing and shark finning, we do have very well managed shark fisheries. So the US is actually a really great model for that. They have very well managed shark fisheries in the US, one of those being blacktip. And blacktip is commonly sold at grocery stores, the meat for that. And shark finning is illegal in the US, so capturing a shark just for its fin is not all right. There are certain sharks that you can't catch as well. But a few of the shark fisheries are very well managed, and we're actually seeing the blacktip populations increase in the US, despite the fact that it is legal to catch and sell shark, the blacktip specifically. Banning shark finning is something that the US has done, and it has to some degree reduced shark finning. Of course, it's not always going to fix the illegal trading, but it is a step in the right direction, and it can be enforced by law enforcement. It's very difficult in the Bahamas because not all of the islands have great resources in order to enforce laws on the water. The US has the Coast Guard, which is very effective in that method. But in other countries, it's a little bit more difficult, especially when they don't have access to those resources. And in terms of fighting climate change, this is a battle that, of course, the entire world is involved in. International committees like the IUCN are involved in this, other climate summits as well. But that's something that is, of course, not necessarily going to be changed by one law change in one country. It takes a lot of effort in order to fix that problem. And now possibly the slide that everyone is wondering about, shark safety. How do you stay safe when you're with sharks? I swim with sharks. I would like to say daily. Unfortunately, I have a lot more emails than that, so I don't necessarily get to be with them daily. But as often as I can, I love to be in the water with sharks. And I can tell you that it is a safe experience. There are, of course, things that you should and shouldn't do when you're in the water with sharks, just in the way that there are things you should and shouldn't do with a dog that you aren't familiar with. But in case anyone's wondering, here are some general guidelines to make you and the sharks feel more comfortable. In general, avoiding murky water with poor visibility is a good rule of thumb. In Bimini, we don't really have to worry about that because we have crystal clear waters a lot of the time. And this is as much for the shark's benefit as you. I'm sure most of you have heard about the mistaken identity case, and that is generally, it's absolutely true. It's when a shark isn't sure what you are, if you're a prey item, if they want to eat you. And of course, that's even harder when there's really poor visibility. If they can't see you and they have to rely on their other senses, that's when they come in with the touch. But like I said, they don't have hands, so their touch is usually with their mouth, and their mouth has pointy teeth in it, so it's like a bite. Yeah, generally. So avoiding murky water when you can actually see through the water is going to be a lot better for you and the shark, so that you're prepared, you can walk around and look out for yourself, and then the shark also can see that you're nothing appetizing. No offense, I'm sure some of you would be very appetizing, but not to a shark. Another example of things not to do is to avoid swimming in areas that are frequently used by fishers. This is instinctual because, of course, fishers are going to be discarding, different fillets in the water. They may be putting bait in the water. So generally avoiding this area when there is a lot of dead fish in the water is going to be a great way to stay away from any sharks that are necessarily very hungry. And then, of course, limit splashing and flailing in the water. This is something that tends to, I wouldn't say attract sharks, but if you're in the water with a lot of sharks around you, and then you start splashing and flailing, they may be more attracted to you than they would have been beforehand. And this actually goes back to the question in the chat um, about dive operations and baiting. And so one of the things we have here whenever we go into the water is we enter very calmly and slowly. That's because a lot of times when people are throwing bait in the water, of course, bait makes a splash, and that's what initially attracts the sharks. So that when there is a splash in the water, the shark will come up to investigate it. And if that's a human, well, you just don't want to leave room for any error. In terms of what you should do with sharks, I do recommend swimming with professional companies that do have experience with shark expedition experiences. This is not always 100%. So some companies have better policies than others. You can feel free to reach out to different people, their experiences, do some digging on the companies to make sure that you feel safe with them, because of course, sometimes there are some operations that don't care as much about safety as much as they do about the dollar. So that's one of the ways you can, if you are looking to get that experience with shark, going with some reputable companies that have this experience is a great way to do it and feel safe about it. I recommend always wearing a fin or your fins and your mask when you're swimming. I can't see all of you, but raise your hand if you've ever heard that you should punch a shark in the nose if it's coming towards you. Yeah, I heard that too. Who thinks it's a good idea to put your hand anywhere near a shark's mouth? Yeah, not me neither. So generally, if a shark is coming a little bit too close to you, getting in your personal space, it's really helpful if you have fins on, so that you have, anywhere between this and this much plastic at the end of your feet that you can put up in between you and the shark. And then, of course, wearing a mask is just going to help you see in the water a little bit better so that you can keep an eye on the sharks around you. And then finally, you just have to understand that when we go into the water, we're entering their space. Risk is involved when you get in the water, just like it's involved when you get on a plane or when you get in your car. There are things that you can't control. There are other influences around you that are going to make your experience, even if you do everything one way or the other, if you do everything perfectly, others around you can influence how you interact with your environment. So understanding that is really helpful when it comes to sharks. Know that it's not malicious, and trust me, you don't look like maybe you look like a seal in the right water. You never know, but generally the sharks are not out to get you. They're not trying to kill humans. They're just trying to get their next meal, and a lot of the times that's when the mistaken identity happens. But I've been swimming in the water with sharks when I've known that they're there. I'm sure I've swam with them when I didn't know that they were there. And it's like a lightning strike. It really is. So I always recommend it. I think people should always get in the water with sharks if they can, and try to have a positive experience, especially with a dive company that will be able to get you this really nice experience with sharks. And even if you're still terrified of them, I mentioned this earlier, but my goal is to not make you not afraid of sharks. It's to make sure that everyone respects sharks, because even if you don't love them, even if you don't want to spend time with them, as long as we all know why they're important in the oceans, why we need to keep their populations up, that's me doing my job. All right, so that is it from me. So I don't know if anyone wants to ask any questions. I'll go ahead and answer that one now about the tourist shark dive facilities that involve feeding. So that's a really great question. Very up for debate. It kind of reminds me of the aquarium debate as well. Are aquariums ethical? Are they good? What good can they do? But I would say in terms of dive companies, it would depend on the dive company. So the one that we have here in Bimini, Neil Watson Scuba Dive Center, is excellent. We have a really great relationship with them. They understand what we do at the Shark Lab. And we understand, of course, what they do at their company. They're always trying to help us out. So we are constantly talking to those guys. They're letting us know what hammerheads they've seen when they've been around. They're always respectful of our science. They let us get our science in. They don't try to impose any of the, they don't try to take the sharks away from us, I guess I should say, which is really great. So we love working with them. I haven't had a lot of experience with other dive companies with shark tourism. I'm sure some of them are not necessarily quite as ethical, and it can be a bit difficult, especially if there are companies that aren't necessarily following the correct safety procedures. But generally, all of them will end up baiting. We bait as well. It's tough to say exactly what the provisioning impacts are. As scientists, we try not to make judgments on that, merely study the results. So we actually do have a paper out about that. That was produced by one of our principal investigators, Vital Hayam, and he was looking at the different effects of provisioning sites, which is the feeding sites, on the great hammerheads. So if anyone is interested in that, that's on our website under current research. Very interesting results in terms of how we're seeing these fed interactions. So in terms of feeding, it can depend as well, I guess I should say. But I try not to have an opinion, and we as scientists try not to form that opinion. We know why we are baiting, and that's because if we didn't bait, we wouldn't be able to get the sharks in so that we could tag them. So, we try not to pass too much judgment on other dive companies that are doing similar things, but just for different reasons. I hope I answered that question thoroughly enough. Does anyone else have any other questions?
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, feel free to type them into the Q&A chat at the bottom of the screen. I have a question for you. I'm kind of curious. When I've been on vacation, many times actually, we've been at the beach at sunset, and it's a great time of day to go for a swim. Is dusk really not the time to be in the water when it comes to sharks?
Yeah, it's not a great, it's a great time for them. But generally, we even avoid the water at dusk. Not necessarily when we're, on scuba, but we have a gorgeous beach called Shell Beach. It's honestly one of the nicest beaches I've been to in the world. That's right on South Bimini. And the bull sharks love to cruise up and down the shore right around dusk. So that can be pretty choppy, especially when it's on the beach. You get a lot of sediment kick up, all that sand's in the water. So generally beaches tend to be pretty murky water to begin with. Yeah, and then of course you do get some of the sharks that tend to hunt right around dusk and dawn. So we tend to advise people probably not to go swimming during that time of day, even though it is very tempting.
Okay, wow. Does that also mean, I'm kind of curious, when you're at the beach and you see like a school of fish, even though it might be in the middle of the afternoon, to kind of veer away from that area?
Not necessarily. It could be anything. It's probably a different type of fish. So it might be a barracuda or a tarpon. And it could be anything really, not necessarily a shark. I wish it was a shark every time we saw kind of a bait ball, but sometimes it's just there's a nice aggregation in that area. So I wouldn't say that you have to avoid those areas. Certainly not. In my experience, most of the time it's not been a shark, unfortunately.
Okay. Any questions? I don't see any questions coming in.
Yeah, well, if anyone does have any questions, they can shoot me an email. My email is outreach@biminisharklab.com. If anyone does want to find out more information about the Shark Lab, they can go visit that website. We've got our current research on there. We've got some really cool opportunities in terms of we have people come to the lab. So we do these field expeditions where people can come for 5 days and come with us, swim with the hammerheads, swim with the Caribbean reef sharks, learn about the science that we do here. And that's a really cool experience. So if anyone is interested in that, wants to come check us out, feel free. If anyone's on Bimini, shoot me an email and we can try to get a tour arranged at some point too. We have a lot of opportunities for people who want to come get involved.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I saw your website and it has all that information. So, well,
Yeah.
hey, listen, as soon as this pandemic's over, I'm coming.
Great, I love it.
So
Can't
this
wait.
is great. What a great presentation. Thank you so much, Sophia.
Oh, thank
And
you.
We'll
Great
have
talking.
thank you. And we'll have the recording up on our YouTube channel within the next day or two. So.
Okay, great. That's awesome. Yeah, I'd love to check it out. Great. Well, thank you so much. It was so great talking to you guys. Hope I was able to impart some wisdom or, increase that respect of sharks.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. You take
Yeah.
care now. Enjoy the weather
Thank you.
down there in Bimini.
I will. Stay warm up there.
Okay. Take care
Okay.
now. Good night.
Good night. Bye-bye.